He deceived both his wife and me for years. Together with his ex-wife, we exposed the truth and completely ruined his life. I fell for my married massage client who lied about being divorced, caught him cheating years later, teamed up with his actual ex-wife and ruined his life. Now he's jobless and homeless. My Stex 40M and I, 32F, first started seeing each other just over 5 years now. I'll be referring to him as Don just for privacy's sake. Don came in as one of my massage clients and we just sort of hit it off right away. I had just gotten out of a previous relationship. I had lost a bit of weight. I just got back from a solo trip to South America and was feeling flirty and fun. Don was coming in to get a massage once every 2 months. At the time, he was a police officer who had just transferred from a smaller town to the big city. He said he was recently divorced and it had been rough, and he asked for the transfer for some space from his ex-wife, Miranda, and her family. He said he grew up in the small town, so everybody knew everybody, and it wasn't too popular for a man like himself to be walking away from his wife, who was a stay-at-home mom to his 2 kids, 14F and 11 Mem. He said she was incredibly manipulative and abusive towards him for years. They had been together since they were 14, and it was a bit taboo for a man to be talking about how his wife was abusing him, so nobody really believed him, and his parents were shaming him a bit for abandoning her. Anyways, he was in rough shape, and we had bonded over our recently failed relationships because I, too, was in a pretty manipulative and emotionally abusive relationship. On the 3rd appointment, he built up the nerve to ask me out to this botanical garden just outside of the city. He ended up picking me up at my place in his ghost car police cruiser, and he was showing off and trying to be cute by putting the lights on, and we'd speed through the streets and down the highways until we got to the gardens. It was thrilling and hot at the time, I will admit. Anyways, he ended up having a really good time and he asked me out on another date. We went on a few more dates after that in the span of 2 months, and at the end of those 2 months, I don't hear from him for a while. I'm just thinking he lost interest, so I just go on my merry way. Then another month goes by and he calls me up and apologizes for not getting to me sooner, and he feels terrible and tells me he has to tell me something. And I say, oh, here we go. Here in my mind, I'm thinking he's just going to tell me being in a relationship so soon isn't going well for him, and he jumped in too soon, and all of that BS. I'm expecting him to say he's not interested in seeing me anymore. Well, I agree to see him, and he picks me up and takes me to this coffee shop by my house and drops this bomb that he's still married. I say, why did you lie? He said he's in a bad relationship. Everything he said about her being abusive is true. I just haven't actually moved out of the house yet because I'm too afraid and I don't want to lose my kids. Well, I get up to leave and he begs me to stay, and he says he's sorry for lying, but he just hasn't ever felt this way before for someone. So I entertain him, and I stay and hear him out, and I feel ashamed to say this, but I actually believed everything he was telling me at the time because I had experienced such bad emotional abuse from my previous boyfriend that he just left me in a really bad place. I could empathize with everything he was saying because I had experience too. Anyways, blah blah, I ended up staying with him, but I said only if he moves out of the house he's in, because he was off still living with his wife at the time, and he starts the separation process. Okay, Don agrees. Within that same week, he tells his wife he's leaving her. He takes his trailer and parks it at a buddy's property. Long story short, here they go through the separation process. Where I'm from, you have to be separated for at least a year in order to start the divorce process. So within that year, Don goes from staying in his parked trailer, and then winter comes and he moves in with me. His daughter goes NC with him. And he doesn't tell his friends or family about me because he doesn't want anybody catching on to the fact that he was still married when we started dating. So anyways, fast forward a year and he files for divorce, but she has a fit and claims that she's scared of him and what he's capable of, and something along the lines of she's scared of what he'll do to himself. She files a restraining order against him so he can't see his kids or go by the house, and because he's a police officer, so they're an investigation and they take his gun away, and he has to work behind us for some time before the investigation is complete. His daughter is still NC with him too. By now his mom and dad, a few friends, and his ex and kids know that he's seeing me, but they think we've just been seeing each other for a few months. Fast forward about 6 months and the restraining order is lifted. The investigation is complete and he's back to active duty. He's been deployed to a different province for work and training quite a few times as well, so he's been gone quite a lot and away from home. I don't think anything of it. He's always talking to me and checking in and gives me a detailed schedule of what his days look like. Yeah, I might have even Googled a conference or two and called the hotels he's claimed to be at, making sure that he's actually staying where he says he's staying and that the conferences actually existed. Every time I had a doubt, I always double-checked and everything checked out. A few years go by, and we end up buying our own place together, and it's so beautiful. Literally the house of my dreams. It's on about 4 acres of land, and it's right off of a lake. He tells me that the divorce is finalized. He proposes to me, we're engaged. His son comes over every second weekend and spends the weekend with us. Everything feels good. We're happy. Well, I go to start planning a wedding and book appointments to see venues, but he becomes distant and uninterested. He keeps saying there's no rush, there's no rush. And I say, I know there's not, but I just want to go and see so we can start making segments Super Bowls so we know what we want when the time comes, or just get little bits done here and there. He obliges, but when we go to see the venues and people are asking when we're thinking of getting married, we can't give them an answer. He says there's no rush. We don't have a date yet. Then he says, oh, maybe in the next 2 to 3 years. And I say, what? 2 to 3 years. And then we start arguing in front of this woman who's showing us around this beautiful hall. She sort of gets the hint that I want to speak to Dawn privately and ends up giving us some space. By this point, I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, what do you mean by 2 to 3 years? And Dawn said, I don't want to rush into things after just getting divorced. It looks bad. And I'm like, well, why did you propose to me? And he said, because I love you. I said, then what are we waiting for? Then he comes out and says he hasn't been totally truthful to me. I say, what the fuck does that mean? And then he says that he's not officially divorced yet. Then I say, I thought you took care of that. He says there was something wrong with the paperwork and she didn't sign it. And I said, so you're technically still married and yet you proposed to me. And I said, well, I proposed because I signed the papers and sent them off to my lawyer thinking that she wouldn't have a problem with them and sign them. She's just being a bitch about it and is giving me a hard time because she doesn't want me to be happy. I call BS and I say this engagement is called off. And he says, wait. He said, I still want to be with you. I want to marry you. And I'm like, I don't want to marry someone who's lying to me. I said, you've lied to me once before. And I thought we were over that. Anyways, long story short, I ended up telling him to pack his things and stay at a buddy's place for a while until I go over some things. He's gone for 2 weeks. And in that time, we did some talking and he said he didn't want to tell me because he didn't want me to leave him. And he's so sorry. And it's not that he doesn't want to be with me. He said he's just afraid of confrontation. He says all these things. And he's like, let's go to counseling together. I'm serious about this. I'm serious about you. Blah, blah, blah. I'd quiet. I didn't just call it all off at this point, but dumb me agreed to couples counseling, but I still call off the engagement until he's officially divorced. He moves back in and we go to counseling and private therapy. 8 months go by and he is officially divorced, so see it for myself. The next day we go camping to celebrate, and he takes me up into some hills, through this path, and down by a waterfall, where he proposes again. Stupid me says yes, but at this point I feel like we've made some progress in our relationship. His daughter has also started talking to him again, so we're feeling pretty relieved. I chalk up his weird behavior and off days before that to the fact that his daughter hasn't been talking to him, and they were pretty close before he separated from his Miranda. Well, in this time, he's been deployed a few more times and has been away from home for weeks at a time. I started running my own clinic, and it's been crazy hectic. I've been distracted with that. One time he comes home from deployment. He tells me he has to take a colleague of his out of province because he can't drive on the medication he's on. I say, why can't he take a bus or a plane? And he says that the guy has a fear of flying and he doesn't want to pass out on the bus with the meds he's on. Well, my guts are telling me something's off and I try to tell him that I don't want him going, and it's a back and forth, but he says that since he's his superior, he feels like he can't say no. So I'm like, okay, I guess. So he leaves on a Sunday and he's back on a Tuesday. Then when he's back, he's sort of distant and I see him on his phone outside while he's doing yard work and he's smiling and laughing and whatever. And when I ask who he was talking to, he says it's the colleague of his who he drove out of province. Okay. Then about 2 weeks go by and it's my cousin's wedding and we're at the reception. He's had a few drinks and then a random person comes up, a friend of my cousin's, and she's looking for an empty chair and then he straight up tells her that she can sit on his lap and tries to grab her. And I'm sitting right there next to him in disbelief. My other cousin looks at me and she's like, the fuck? And she sort of tries to pretend it didn't just happen, and the chick he told to sit on his lap sort of just laughs awkwardly and walks away. Then I go to the washroom and I'm completely pissed off, and by the time I come back, he's dancing with some other woman and I see my brother there and ask him to drive me home. While I'm home, I go onto his iPad because I'm curious to see if he's connected his messages to his iPad. Sure as heck, there they are. It's under some fake name, Mark. And there's flirting back and forth, sexting. Nude pics and videos exchanged, you name it. And the days he said he had to drive a colleague, you guessed it, that colleague was in fact Mark, who is in fact a woman with a blonde pixie cut who we'll call Liz. He spent the days with her. And on the days he's been deployed, he's come back a day earlier than he told me he was, and had to go straight to her house to hook up. And he'd drive to our home the next day, pretending that he just got in from wherever he was. I take screenshots of everything and I send them to myself. Then I send them to him and tell him not to come home. I tell him we're totally done. I don't get a response right away. He's probably passed out somewhere or is hooking up with someone. I've also locked the doors to the house and I know he can't get in because I took the keys home with me in my purse and we don't keep a spare outside anywhere. My brother had picked us up. Anyways, the next day I wake up to text messages and voicemails in the morning saying he's sorry. All that jazz. I block him. Then around noon I get a call from my cousin and she's saying that Don is sitting in the hotel lobby and he is saying I left him there without a way to get home. And I said he should ask the woman he was dancing with for a ride home. And she said what? And I said he's not allowed home. and she got the hint. I then get a call from Dawn's brother saying that he's got to come over and pick up some stuff for Dawn, and I said I'll have all of his shit packed and outside on the driveway. So his brother drives up the driveway and parks outside the house, and I can see Dawn come out in the clothes he was wearing at the wedding and cut the front to the front door and tries the door open. So then he goes around the back and tries that, but it's also locked. Then I watch him try the windows to see if maybe we left any unlocked. To no luck. Cuck. He starts yelling my name, and I'm watching his brother pack his stuff into the back of his truck. He starts yelling at me, saying that he's sorry and he's saying that I can't keep him out of his own house, blah blah. Then, after about 15 minutes, they both leave. A few days go by and I get a text from Miranda asking what happened with Dawn. He was supposed to pick up his son from hockey practice, but didn't show up and she can't get a hold of him. She's checking to make sure he's alive. Well, I text back and say I wish he were dead. And she says, hope all is okay. Then I do something that I've never done before and I call her. I tell her that I'm so sorry that I ruined her marriage and that I fucked up the girl code. And I literally told her everything. I said I dated her husband behind her back and I told her what he told me about her. Everything. She honestly took it surprisingly well. She said she figured that he was cheating on her. She said he was never home. And she said that her daughter caught him texting another woman, who may or may not have been me, and she asked him about it, and he totally denied it and gaslit her, and made her think that she was crazy, and then that's where the NC came about. And then she admitted that she got a restraining order because she was legitimately afraid of him because she wanted to spill the beans to their family and friends about what a scumbag he is, but he threatened to kill her. So then he threatened her again and basically made her life a living hell with stalking and such until she lifted the restraining order. So this whole time I told her that he was telling me that he was afraid of her and that she was the abusive one. She said it was totally the other way around. She said he manipulated her enough that she was afraid to talk to anyone, and she was super depressed. She said there were so many times that she wanted to just call me and tell me everything, but that she was afraid I would think she was crazy and wouldn't believe her. Dawn told her that if he ever found out that she reached out to me, that he'd get her arrested and take the kids away from her. So yeah, I get it. So well, after talking a bit more, I said that I was going to pick her up the next day and that we'd go and file a report against him. She wasn't sure at first, but I talked her into it, and I said that she wasn't alone, that I'd have her back, and that we're in this together. So we filed a report. They opened up an investigation. I got word that he was suspended with pay due to domestic violence. A few months went by and I got a call from Miranda, and she said that he had been fired and she had a restraining order placed on him to protect her and the kids. I ended up getting one too because we didn't know what he was capable of. He's currently living in his trailer on his buddy's property. Homeless and jobless, he'll never be in the police force again, and he has been disowned by his parents and his kids won't talk to him. He's been branded abusive and a cheater and his community hates him. His buddy had come by to pick up the rest of his stuff, even though a lot of the furniture and house goods were mine. He picked up a chair, some outdoor things, a gun safe, and little things here and there. Miranda and I have hung out quite a lot during this whole process, and we've actually become really good friends. I still see the kids and his daughter is still iffy about me, but she's warming up to me even though I totally understand where she's coming from. I bought out the rest of the house, and it's officially all mine. I got that snake out of my hair, and I still enjoy a nice cup of coffee on my deck in the morning overlooking the lake. So life is good. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Now on to the next story. Story 2. I caught my wife cheating on me with her sister's husband, so I checked her phone, gathered evidence, and exposed them in front of the whole family. Now they're both divorced and disowned. I, 32 male, was married to my ex-wife, 28 female, for 2 years. So it still shocks me that after all the promises my ex-wife made to me, she stooped so low and cheated on me. My wife and I first met at my cousin's college graduation ceremony. She had also come to attend her brother's graduation, and we got along well. After the ceremony, she gave me her number at request, but it took me weeks for her to finally take my calls. After weeks of her not taking my calls, I coincidentally bumped into her one day, and she apologized for not taking my calls and offered that we should go to the movies together. Going to the movies was our first date, and from there, multiple dates followed, and we ended up marrying after a year of dating. In the beginning, marrying my wife brought me so much happiness. She ticked all my boxes, and everything was smooth between us. She was great in bed, a good cook, and she took good care of me. We were always so happy together, and I loved what we shared. While my wife worked as a data entry clerk, I worked as a heavy machine technician, and what we earned was enough to take care of us. Aside from being happy that I married my wife, I was also glad she had a great family. I grew up with my dad, and he raised me as a single parent. And the only cousin I had was my dad's younger sister's daughter. One of the things I always looked forward to was a family of love, and that's what my wife had. She had 2 brothers and 1 sister, plus her parents. Her family were so close to each other, and since we all lived in the same town, we used to hang out once every month as a family unit. Whenever we had a picnic, family dinner, or a gathering, All of my wife's siblings would come with their spouses, and this was how I got close to one of her brother-in-laws, my wife's sister's husband. We were around the same age, which allowed us to bond well. Most times, if my wife and her sister were hanging out or going out of town for the wedding of a mutual friend or an extended family member, her brother-in-law and I would go out for a couple of drinks or watch football together. As time passed, he wasn't just my favorite brother-in-law, we became very good friends. So months after my wife and I clocked a year together, I noticed she was getting closer to her sister's husband. It's not like there was anything wrong with being close to her sister's husband, but I felt something was different with their relationship and some other changes followed. For example, if we went for a family dinner, my wife would talk to everybody except her brother-in-law, which was very unlike her. And if her brother-in-law and I were hanging out and I mentioned my wife in our conversation, he would avoid the topic and chip in something else. Regarding their closeness, if we all went somewhere, maybe the park or shopping mall, my wife would prefer to hang with her sister and husband than with me. So if we sat at a table to eat together, she would prefer to sit next to him and leave me alone wherever I was. I quietly watched her for months to ensure my head was not messing with me. Around the same time I noticed all these changes, my wife's attitude towards me changed, too. It got so bad that we could not converse without her mentioning her brother-in-law's name. Our intimacy dropped, too, and she barely allowed me to touch her. Whenever I tried to, she'd complain about being tired or not being in the mood. Sometimes she'd even say she was seeing her monthly flow, even when I knew she wasn't. Before I suspected something was going on between her and her brother-in-law, my wife did not care about her looks whenever we wanted to hang out as a family unit. But she suddenly became so concerned. She'd wash and curl her hair in advance, pick out a dress that would expose her thighs and cleavages, and apply makeup. It became evident that she was trying to look good for a reason, and even her sister and other family members noticed a great difference. The whole time I had been suspecting my wife, deep down I wanted to be wrong. But one night, after waiting for almost an hour for her to stop chatting and blushing on her phone and spend time with me, she said she was tired as usual and slept off. I was so hurt by her actions and neglect that I went through her phone to see who had been making her blush like that. When I accessed her phone and went through her social media accounts, I stumbled on her messages on WhatsApp with her sister's husband. She saved his name as Bestie with 3 love emojis, and I suspected he was the one before I opened their conversation. I could not believe what I saw when I went through their conversation. Not only was my wife having an affair with her Bill, as I suspected, but they had also exchanged nudes. Even that evening, he had sent her pictures of his private part and wrote a long erotic text of all the nasty things he would do to her when they met again. They planned to meet in a cheap motel in 2 days, and they kept recounting their last escapade together. I was so disappointed and didn't know how to feel. To even think that they were making jokes about her getting pregnant for him and keeping the child. I felt so betrayed. At that moment, I felt like stuffing her with a pillow. I had to control my anger because she wasn't worth getting a life sentence for. Shortly after I was done with my emotional meltdown, I had an idea to teach her a lesson. So, I took screenshots of their conversation, especially the parts where he sent her his nudes, and they mentioned meeting at the motel to have fun. Then, I cleared all traces that I went through her chats. That night, I couldn't sleep at home because I was hurt and kept crying like a baby. Even though I suspected something was fishy, I still could not believe my wife would break me like that after all our promises to each other. The following day, I went to work at the motel I spent the night at, and she kept calling me the whole morning to find out why I wasn't at home when she woke up. I cooked up a lie for her, and I told her I'd be home after work. When I got home that evening, she could tell something was wrong, but I told her I had a bad day at work. Meanwhile, the following day, she had planned to meet with my Bill at the motel. She didn't know I had called her sister and explained everything. She was more shocked than I was and promised she would not confront her husband. Also, I created a WhatsApp group chat, added all her close family members to it, and told them everything I found out. I dropped the screenshots I took there so everyone could see, and they couldn't believe it. Her sister kept doubting that my wife would do such a thing to her. After everyone was out of their shock phase, we all planned to go to the location of the motel they would be using so we could catch them in the act. On D-Day, which was a Saturday, I watched as my wife dressed her best, did her makeup, and lied to me about going to see one of her old-time friends who had just given birth. I acted all calm and watched her as she left. About 10 minutes after she left, I drove to the location and notified her family that she was on the move. Eventually, we all rendezvoused at the motel as planned and decided to go to her room. So there were 5 of us, excluding her father. When we got to her room, I knocked and pretended to be room service, and she opened the door with a white towel wrapped around her chest. The moment she saw that I was the one, she froze. Then, we all entered the room one after the other. Her Bill was in the bathroom, and when he heard voices and came out to see us, he ran back into the bathroom and refused to come out. So my sister-in-law was so heartbroken, and she attacked my wife. Right there, I told her to her face to not bother coming home and that she'd be hearing from my lawyer soon. Her mom and brothers could not even say anything to her. They all stood there in awe. I left the room and left them there so she could deal with her family. Immediately I got home, I threw her stuff out of my house and contacted a divorce lawyer to start processing our divorce papers. She tried to call me and beg a couple of times, and I told her she was insane to think I'd take back a shameless cheat like her. The worst was that she had no one to turn to, her family disowned her, and her sister cut all ties with her because she couldn't handle the betrayal. I had to divorce her and officially get rid of her. Her sister also divorced her husband, and my wife had to move in with her friend before she left town. Later, I found out that their affair started under my roof, and they had it going long before I suspected something was happening. My wife claims she continued the affair with her Bill because he was not as boring as me. I guess she will have enough fun living with disappointed family members for the rest of her life. I'm fine now, but I've decided not to marry again. It's better to be alone, so I don't experience such disappointment and heartbreak again.